Jonathan never even wanted to talk about knowing Michael after the experience that we had. But anyways, John and I went on and were working, with other people and doing our thing. And everybody kept saying to me, you should direct a feature, because everybody in the commercial business in London was starting to do features. And everybody said, do a feature. And I said, how do you do a feature? And they said, write a script. So we're doing this huge budget Procter & Gamble commercial. And the agency producer was a guy named Kerry Jones, who had just written a novel and was a good friend of mine. We'd worked together before, and he had hired me for this big budget commercial, which actually the budget on that commercial was about 3 times the budget on Deathline when we get there.
Wow.
And
I think that's still the case with a lot of commercials versus films.
You're probably right. And so anyways, I had this idea, which I read a lot, I write a lot, and I research a lot. And I had gotten interested in how the tubes began. I had heard about the legend of Siri Bean, who was a highwayman turned cannibal in Scotland, and I eat that kind of stuff.
Great article about that on Blumhouse.com in reference to The Hills Have Eyes. Yeah.
Oh, yeah? Mm-hmm. Well, so I took that and then the Donner Pass thing and everything, and I'm thinking about it all. And aside from the fact that Jonathan and I, and I had done it with other people too, had written a number of scripts that we were never able to sell because all of my scripts were very political. I am a political. I mean, I left the country because of politics.
Yet you're here now, of all things.
Yeah, really.
A lot of us don't want to leave.
I don't know why I'm here.
This has got to be worse than next time.
Don't leave us.
I was going to leave.
Stay with the rest of us.
I actually had said to people that I was going to leave, but I still might.
Just not till after the interview.
Okay. But, I mean, I hate what's going on right now.
Yeah.
But, so anyways, none of my political scripts sold. And I thought, and somebody, John Daly, actually, from the Hemdale Company, said to me, write a horror script. That you'll sell. And I thought, wow. How I could hide a political message inside a horror script and nobody would ever know.
Nice.
Yep.
And I was really reacting because I had been, my dad was involved in civil rights his whole life, and I was raised in a very colorblind home. And I got to England, and everybody in England talked about racism in America, where I'm living in a society there that is as class conscious, and the classism there so far outweighs what our racism is here.
Yeah.
And I said, somebody's got to say something about that. And so that's what I did. I wrote the script and made the monster the sympathetic character because he wasn't responsible for what he did. Society was responsible for his actual existence. And it was, I'm not really sure that I realized how different that was when I wrote it. I wasn't trying to write something different. I was trying to write something that just made a point. And I wanted performances, and I wanted real characters. And
speaking of the performers, look at the two. You got in one scene together. As a young person, when I finally saw that movie, I remember being pretty blown away to see Donald Pleasance and Chris Lee, kind of squaring off there. And it's quite funny. It reminds me of and Frenzy. Frenzy's quite an intense movie, but then it has these comic scenes between the husband and wife. And I felt kind of similar, the little comic, exchange between them.
And
in
only
Frenzy,
time.
it was Clive Swift who plays
that's right.
He's
in it too,
the London transport cop in Deathline.
That's right, yeah.
He had just finished Frenzy when I cast him in Deathline.
Oh, funny.
But it was Donald that brought everybody to the movie. I mean, as people have said, I had the audacity to go after Donald Pleasance. And at that time, Donald Pleasance was the actor's actor.
He's a Harold Pinter actor at that point.
Yeah,
right?
he was, he had more awards and, British Academy Awards and Tonys. He was doing Man in the Glass Booth on Broadway when I had the idea of casting him. And he had just won a Tony for it. And everybody says to me, he's not going to do it. And I said, let's go after him. And, and I had Jay Cantor as my executive producer who, was like every agent in the world wanted to be Jay Cantor. And so Jay could call any agent in the world and say, so Jay calls Donald's agent and says, I have this young director that's making a movie for us and he wants to get this script to Donald. And he claims that he's heard that Donald wants to do a comedy. And if you take just the Cahoon character out of Deathline, it's pure comedy. And I said this to his agent, and she said, okay. She sends it to Donald in New York. I get on a plane. I go to New York. And I said, I want to talk to him. And he agreed to have dinner with me. And he said, I love it, and I want to do a comedy. He says, I'm not going to think about the other parts of the script because that doesn't have anything to do with the part that I'm playing.
I almost feel like the levity that is brought to the role and what is demonstrated kind of informed the American Werewolf and London Investigators a little bit.
Yeah.
If you watch them back to back, you're like, oh yeah, Landis definitely is.
John does not deny that he was influenced by Death.
I bet. Yeah.
Interesting.
I was gonna say, just take us on the day of the Cushing Pleasance moment. Like, to me, that like you said, I was completely blown away.
Yeah,
and the stories, and I never get to hear enough of those stories about what went down between those two and what it was like.
Well, Christopher was good friends with Paul Maslansky. And Christopher said, what are you doing, Paul? And Paul said, well, I'm doing this film with this young director who's had the audacity to get Donald Pleasance to be in it. Christopher says, where's my part? And Paul says, our budget is less than you get paid to do a movie. And he says, I want to work with Donald Pleasance.
Wow.
Yeah.
If you'll write me a one-on-one scene with Donald Pleasance and I don't have to wear fangs, I'll do it for scale.
Wow.
Nice.
So that's what we did. And I then realized, oh my God, I'm going to have Donald Pleasance and Christopher Lee in a room with me, a 20-something-year-old director who's never directed a film before. And I have another problem. Christopher's like 1.5 feet taller than Donald.
That's true. He towers above him.
And am I answering your question?
Absolutely, yeah. And I said Cushing, not Lee, which is my bad. But no, I mean, it's like
we knew what you meant.
yeah, everybody knows what I meant. But no, I'm just it reminded me of a similar scenario. Your friend Michael Mann when he brought Al Pacino and De Niro together, and it's just one of those powerhouse moments.
Two titans.
It's
Two
also
titans,
the one and only time I think they ever got to work together.
Yeah,
right?
it
They never
is.
did a film together before or after.
And it was all Christopher wanted to do a scene with, and we wrote it for the two of them.
Right,
I mean,
right.
it was, but then shooting it.
So wait a minute. So you got notes from Pleasance and Lee, like did they come to you and go, well, I probably wouldn't have said this, but I'll change this?
Not really.
No?
No, they just kind of accepted
Carrie and
their
I
roles.
wrote it,
Really?
and they looked at it, and they
just made it their own. And
Actor.
Wow.
They just do what they're told.
Yeah.
They're professionals. I love it.
And then
I don't know what I would do if
Yeah,
they came
now.
to me, like,
the problem was I didn't want Donald looking up at the ceiling and Christopher looking down at the floor.
Right.
So that's when I came up with the idea of shooting them in singles and having them look straight into the camera. And I had the camera set at Christopher's eye height and had him looking straight into camera, and then camera set at Donald's eye height and having Donald. So it looks like they're looking straight at each other, but there's like 18 inches difference in their height.
And I remember when I first talked to you about it, and I didn't notice it until you pointed it out, was you were saying, I think it starts in close-ups on who is the more dominant personality in the conversation.
Right, it starts in close-ups on Donald.
Right, and as Christopher Lee takes over, you zoom in closer to him. So subtly, it's the way of showing.
We had the camera on a dolly and started on Donald, and every line we pulled back. And it was measured out as to how that was going to work with the two of them. And pull back and pull back and pull back and pull back. And on Christopher, we started wide, and every line we pushed in.
Yeah.
And they're never on camera together until Christopher sits down. And then once Christopher was sitting down, I could do 2 shots.
Yeah. You worked that out.
Now, talk a little bit more about the filming, specifically what it was like shooting in the subways, and how you worked some of those shots. And
yeah, was this all practical?
It was
locations?
all real locations.
Did you shut the subways down?
No.
Oh, they were abandoned.
All the stuff. We only shot one day in a real underground station, and that's the Aldwych station in the city, which at that time was closed on Sunday. And we had the station on a Sunday. And there's only a couple of scenes where you actually see a real train. It's only when you see the train that we're shooting in an actual tube station. The rest of the time, there's over 500 miles of abandoned tube tunnel under London.
Wow.
Which is talked about in the film because those tunnels were dug by competing companies, and then many of them never even got used. Some of them were used as storage areas during the war for ammunition and munitions and air raid shelters. There's, as I said, 500. So we were down in the abandoned tunnels and had to move a lot of homeless people out of there who we actually had them moved and paid for them to have a place to stay.
Good. I was going to say, it became part of the problem. If you're just kicking all these homeless people out of their homes.
We didn't do that at all. We hired some of them to help us clean up the area and and then we made it nicer for them when they moved back in.
Oh, good.
So we did take care of everybody. But the smell down there, oof. It's 45 years later, I can still smell what it smelled like down
That's
there.
like what you hear about Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I've heard that same thing where
They never forget.
where they tried to burn all the meat, but the smell just stayed for the rest of the...
The dinner scene where everything was rotting on the table.
Yeah, very visceral.
Yeah.
Well, we couldn't afford to have some special effects person make up all those dead bodies and the hanging meat, so we used real meat.
Yeah.
And that meat was hanging there all the time we were shooting. So every day it smelled worse and worse. And then we brought the maggots in and introduced the maggots into the meat.
Oh, wow.
And then we had the rats.
Oh, Jesus.
And,
So those were real rats.
Those were real rats. We had some trained rats, but there were a bunch of not trained rats. We had rats around all the time.
Wow. They were just like hanging out and you were like, shoot that rat.
Yeah, but when we did this,
Not like with a BB gun, like with the camera, like shoot the rat.
shoot the rat.
Delving into Bekah's psyche here.
Capture the rat on film.
The rat in its natural
Film
habitat.
the rat.
Film the rat. But, like in that scene where the man's running around and biting off heads and stuff, those were our trained rats.
Huh.
And some, but then we brought some dead rats in that we found around. There were a lot of dead rats around.
Wow, you brought them onto set and everything?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's how you get plague, sir.
Yeah.
Talk briefly about the score. There's an opening theme to this movie that when I saw the film in high school, there was no internet. There was nothing like that. I could just only go to like Tower Records and go, excuse me, but do you have the Raw Meat soundtrack? And they go, what, kid? I just love the seediness because you literally have this, this man of power walking through these seedy streets, past porno shops, past all that, and this music's just driving him along, and it was so catchy.
I have the record of this.
I do have.
I showed him, and you didn't realize it was on vinyl.
Well, Will Malone is quite well known in England. In fact, on Trailers from Hell, Joe Dante's website, Edgar Wright does the introduction for Deathline, and in the middle of the whole thing, he starts talking about Will Malone and what a fan he is of Will Malone. And I mean, Will Malone's gone on to do a lot of stuff. He's produced Coldplay. He's he had a group called Orange Light.
The guy who did Deathline produced Coldplay.
I'm just imagining him introducing the theme music for this film to the guys from Coldplay. Now, I want a little more like Deathline.
A little more Deathline in there.
Make it really skeezy. You want to take a shower after this.
It's really funny.
It's a damn fine theme.
But he had a group called the Orange Bicycle, which was like a real kind of alternative rock group. And I was given a free hand, and I was into music, and I loved the stuff that Will was doing. Jeremy Rose, who I hired to kind of be the music coordinator on the picture, was a guy I had done a lot of commercials with. And actually, we had just done a commercial, and he had brought in Manfred Mann to do the track and And I couldn't afford Manfred Mann to do the movie. And I said to him, I want somebody Manfred was pretty far out back then. And I said, who? And he says, Will Malone. We'll bring you Will Malone. And I met Will and listened to his music and said, get crazy.
Wow. It seemed
I would say he did that.
What happened on the back end and in terms of like the different names, and did the distribution go well initially when the film first came out, and then was it when it came to America that the title changed? How did that happen?
The film opened unbelievably in Europe. In the UK, it was what they called an Edie plan picture, which was a tax thing. And with Edie, depending on how big the box office was how much Edie you were paid back. And the maximum was double Edie. And usually it took a picture a month or 2 months, because back then it wasn't like it is today, where a picture opens and closes and has to make money in the first week. But with Deathline, it went double Edie within the first week and a half. And it was just, there were lines around the block.
Now, was it perceived as being more of a social issue and more political there? Like, did people kind of, was it still...
People pick up on what you were going
Did they
for?
get it, what you were...
Some did. I mean, Robin Wood, who was a very prominent critic at the time, he picked up on it completely. There was a review in the London Times and in the Financial Times that they really got what it was about. The more average papers just, actually some of them, the reviews were everything from glowing to scathing. Actually, they were glowing and scathing with very little in between.
That's horror film too. That's what happens.
The Daily Mail had the rank organization should be ashamed of themselves was the headline of the review. And I think that sold more tickets than the good reviews, if you want to know the truth.
Nicholas Roeg took the rank, where rank gave, I think their reaction to Bad Timing was, this is the most disgusting film ever committed to celluloid, and then they took that quote and put it on their poster, even though it was the company that funded the movie and hated it. And I'm like, now that's how you do it.
Well, it was weird. It was opened, Rank was nervous about the film, and they opened it on the second half of a double bill with another movie. And what happened was that within 2 or 3 days, nobody was going to see the other movie, and there were lines of people waiting to go see Deathline. So the theater started pulling the other movie and running Deathline twice as often.
And that's amazing, because the first film was Chariots of Fire. Remarkable double feature. If you haven't done it, try it at home.
It was a picture called Night Hair Child.
Oh, well, there you go.
Not Chariots of Fire.
Not Chariots of Fire.
All right, I'll take
Same producers of
Hey.
Jay and Laddie produced Chariots of Fire.
It's a broad
So,
stroke.
that was a Ladd Company film, as was Deathline.
So, but I imagine it didn't obviously get the same exposure here in America at the time.
Well, what happened was Frank Yablans was president of Paramount at the time. Frank was in London, and David Niven Jr. was running CIC, which was the Paramount Universal co-production or co-distribution company in Europe. And David had seen the film and really liked it. And he told Frank about it and asked Frank to come see it. So he and Frank screened it. And at the point when the man grabs Sharon on the platform, they both jumped. Frank jumped to the right. David jumped to the left. They knocked their heads together.
Oh, wow.
And so they called and said, David's assistant called and said, as soon as their headaches go away, they're going to call you, but they love the movie and they want to make an offer. So we were really excited. Jay and Laddie and Paul and I were sitting in the office waiting for this phone call. So we pick up the phone, we called the people in New York who had financed the film and said, we've sold the film worldwide to Paramount. We're going to make a deal with them tomorrow. And they said, it's too late. I said, what do you mean it's too late? They said, we just sold it to AIP. At which point I took out a razor blade and slit my wrist.
Man.
And then it ended up that they sold it to AIP on a cross-collateralization thing because they had some other pictures that they had done with AIP that had gone into the toilet. And we were stuck. And we said, no, Paramount wants the picture worldwide, except for the UK, which Rank had the UK. And they said, it's too late. And we didn't know about the cross-collateralization. That's why it was too late. So Samuel Ziarkov gets his hands on the picture. And
look up some quotes by Sam Ziarkov and you'll get a feeling for why this film is no longer in good hands. Well, he knows he does trash.
Samuel Ziarkov comes to London and calls me, and he's staying at this suite at the Savoy. And he says, come and see me. So I went and saw him. He answers the door in a silk smoking jacket with a big SZA monogram on
that
it.
sounds so Sam Arkoff.
With a cigar that's about the size of a small baseball bat.
Nice. So great.
And I go in and I start talking to him, and he says, why do you want to do pictures with people like Alan Ladd and Jay Cantor? They don't know anything about making movies. And he goes on and he starts bad-mouthing them. And I said, Sam, this was a nice conversation.
Yeah.
Fuck off. And I left because I love Jay and Laddie, and they've been very, very good to me over the years, and so ba-boom. And
producers were big personalities back in the day.
Yeah.
I mean, like Sam,
Castle, they all
all of them, big personalities. It's amazing.
Well, I would have rather worked with William Castle than Sam Arkoff.
Yeah.
But anyway, so then we didn't even know when they were releasing it. And when they released Raw Meat and we saw the ads on Raw Meat, we didn't even know Raw Meat was Deathline. And then it was Robin Wood, who was writing for the Village Voice, as well as, for the papers that he wrote for in England, who published an article called Butchered in the Village Voice. And he said, Butchered is what AIP has done to a picture called Deathline, and they turned it into Raw Meat. And don't go see Raw Meat because it's not Deathline. Wait till you can see Deathline, because Deathline's a great picture and Raw Meat's a piece of shit.
And they'll be waiting till now.
And they had to wait 45 years.
That's crazy. Isn't that crazy?
I will say the one sheet that they made for Raw Meat is pretty striking.
It's striking.
There's somebody there's a shop in Burbank that has one that I just keep eyeballing every time I go. It's just a striking piece of art, even if it's just a little.
Yeah.
Showing
is that it?
This
With all the kind of zombie
you
woman.
know what?
Yeah,
That in no way is
white-eyed.
in the movie, but it's actually some decent art.
There is a script. There is like an actual publicity shot behind the art.
Yeah.
The rest of it looks like a cult cannibal film.
Oh yeah,
crazy.
it's unbelievable. It is
It's
absolutely.
like Rob Zombie and his minions.
I mean, it had nothing to do with the movie.
It does totally look like a Rob
Nothing.
Zombie.
Did you quickly go into your try to get into another movie to kind of take your mind off that, that side of it with Dead and Buried, or did Dead and Buried take a long time?
I did the opposite.
Okay.
I didn't want to make another movie.
Oh, wow.
I had made this movie, which was a big hit in Europe, but when it went back to my home, it disappeared, and I was really upset about it. I had a very successful commercials career going, and I just said, you know what? I'll just keep making commercials. My heart was broken when Deathline was turned into raw meat, and I just said, if that's the way people are going to treat it, I don't want to do that. No, they don't do that to my commercials. Why should I submit myself to this? And I didn't. And it wasn't until Ron Shusett came banging on my door one day and said, I'm the world's biggest fan of Deathline, and I want you to make a movie with me. And he brought me Dead and Buried. And
Didn't he write something else interesting? Some little movie?
What was that?
he's written a lot of
movie?
stuff.
No, I'm kidding. Alien.
Well,
He's the Shusett.
You had told me off record that, when we talked on the phone, that you were maybe up for Alien.
I was up for Alien.
Wow.
But there was Ronnie wanted me to do Alien, and Jay and Laddie were considering me for Alien because they were the president and vice president, or executive vice president of Fox then. Gordon Carroll, who was one of the producers, he basically was pushing for Walter Hill to direct it. And to tell you the truth, I really love and respect Walter Hill, and I wasn't ready to get into a one-on-one battle with Walter. Then when Walter dropped out of it, because of Driver, which was funny, because now people look at Driver
Great
on a
movie.
whole different level at the time.
It's one of his best.
It was a big failure for him at the time.
It was a big failure, and then Fox was afraid to let him do the picture.
Well, he said in some interviews lately that he was also a little intimidated by the effects. He didn't know if he could
Of Alien.
pull off the effects in Alien. Like he hadn't made that kind of movie.
Right.
I mean, he and David Giler did the final draft of that, and they did a wonderful
on the script.
brilliant script. Walter is one of my heroes. I mean,
Absolutely. Mine too.
And
So I was going to say, what struck you about Dead and Buried that made you want to take on that in the wake of what had happened on Deathline?
Dead and Buried felt there's a political message that I was able to
Again,
put into
smuggle
Dead
into
and
the main
Buried.
picture. Yeah.
Of totalitarianism, of manipulation of human beings, and the original script, and what Ron and I took from the original script that Ron brought me, and Ron and I worked on the script extensively for a while. We really honed the comedy. It was really funny when it was funny, and it was really dark when it was dark.
Right.
And so I said, and we went to do it, and we made the movie. And unfortunately, you can listen to the commentary. 3 different production companies are involved in the film. Now, Avco Embassy was going to be the distributor, but they weren't the producer. They were just the distributor. It started out to be Guinness, with Richard St. John running the Guinness company. He was great. They were going to make the movie that Ronnie and I wanted to make. Then Guinness dropped out of the film business, and it was bought by a company called Aspen Productions, which was John Hyde. And John basically was going along with what we wanted to do, and we were making the picture that we wanted to make. Then Mark Damon steps in. He was running PSO at the time and buys Aspen Productions. We have a screening of my cut of the film, which Bob Ramey, who was president of Avco at the time, hugs me after the screening and says, "This is brilliant. I love this movie." And everybody else was really happy with it. Mark Damon comes and puts his arm around my shoulder and takes me into a corner of the theater and says, okay, if I wanted Bergman to direct a horror film, I would have hired Bergman. So now turn this into a horror picture.
Oh, geez.
And boom. Anyways, the rest is history. I changed a few things for them. It wasn't enough for them.
Right.
Bob Ramey was very protective of me because he really liked the picture. Bob Ramey tried to sue them to not change the movie. It didn't work because the studio did not have that power over them. Jay Cantor, who'd always been my mentor, said to me, "Walk away. Don't get involved in this. There's going to be lawsuits. Just walk away. Start your next picture." And he called Bob Ramey, and he said, "Don't put Gary in a position where he's got to be in the middle of this." And Bob Ramey says, "Okay, and in fact, I want Gary to do another picture for me right away." So Bob called me. I went into the studio, and Bob puts a pile of scripts on the desk and says, "Here, go home, read these, pick one,
Right.
and let's do it."
And then you're at home, depressed in boxer shorts, watching Young and the Restless, and you're like, that guy is going to play a white pimp. And that's the exact story, right?
That's there's a week in between there.
Before we get to it, though, before we get to my the thing I'm most excited to talk about, but the funny thing is did the elements for your cut could they still exist? Is there any way to?
They destroyed my cutting copy.
Oh,
okay.
no.
And at that time, there was no videotape. We didn't
Yeah.
videotape anything. They destroyed my cutting copy so that I couldn't go back and put the film back together.
And the weird thing about cinema, I guess, because your experience is I imagine you can never fully love Dead and Buried because of that. I mean, the film that exists now.
You will always see
90% of my
be.
Dead and Buried is there.
Yeah.
And there's 10% that's added in. It's not that they changed what I did. They put in other scenes that I didn't want.
Okay,
in
gotcha.
the
To make it a little more hard. And yet, that's of all the genre movies I can think of like movies that are lesser known, like horror films, that one's never failed to be the kind of, to me, it's like the definitive cult horror movie that you could give to somebody who's looking for a horror film they haven't seen, and I've never heard somebody come back and not have loved it.
Yeah,
It's like that perfect gem of that kind of movie. But I know from your perspective it's different, but as a viewer.
I love Dead and Buried.
Okay, good.
I mean, I absolutely adore that movie. I just hate the scenes that, that they put in with special effects, not by Stan.
Yeah.
Because Stan didn't want to go back in and do that stuff over again. He called me and, said, "You don't want to do this, do you?" I said, "No, I don't want to do it." He said, "Then I won't do it." Because they can't make me do it. They might be able to make you do it, but they can't make me do it, and I won't do it. And they hired some, I don't even remember who the special effect, the acid in the nose.
Yeah.
That's the worst special effects I have ever seen.
Huh.
I don't even remember who did that. And
I'm sure that guy's a listener.
it's
funny. Cursing you now.
Him and Michael Mann often do listen. Let's be honest.
Yeah, they're our biggest.
I was going to say it's because of Stan's involvement that sent me down the rabbit hole. Because of Stan's involvement, I saw Dead and Buried, and then because of Dead and Buried and you, I was like, "Oh, what's Deathline?" And I just kept going back, and then I was like, "Oh, Poltergeist 3,"
Yeah.
which I'm sure you guys want to talk about.
Well, we'll
I
get
did.
there.
We'll get, but I just
Box
want to
cover.
know.
I wanted to ask about the box cover for Dead and Buried, because that's one of the ones that I look back at, like, what struck me on video store shelves in the 80s that I was like, okay, I have to see this based on cover alone.
Yeah.
And that's when I first rented Dead and Buried. So how did that art come to be?
Ronnie.
Ronnie?
That was absolutely Ron Shusett. Ron Shusett was so blown away working with H.R.
Giger,
on Alien, and Giger pointed him to this artist.
Oh. It is a gorgeous piece
who
of art.
ended up doing the piece. And Ronnie brought me an early sketch, and I went, fuck yes. That's unbelievable. I mean, I have 85 Dead and Buried posters, different sizes and stuff hanging all over my house, just not because it's Dead and Buried, but I love that piece of artwork.
It's so striking. Like, I remember it terrifying me on video store shelves till I finally got up enough nerve to rent it. And then I love the movie, of course, but it was that art that did it for me.
It's a film with layers, and it's a film that has surprises to still reveal. And I think a lot of, because it starts out so kind of nasty, and you think, oh, is this like a slasher type movie? And it slowly reveals itself to be a really smart, clever, dark tale, which I think is kind of rare in that period. I think it really stands the test of time nicely.
It does, because we haven't seen anything since then. Sorry, Rob.
I was just going to say, I really wish that somebody would give Dead and Buried the exact same treatment that this wonderful Deathline Blu-ray has. Is that possible, Gary?
Can we have such a gift?
Right now, as we sit here in Los Angeles, in London, England, the original negative of Dead and Buried is passing itself through a 4K scan.
Yes.
Boom.
And we are going to restore completely Dead and Buried and do some extras that'll blow people away.
And who's responsible for this?
None other than Bill Lustig.
Of course it's
Bless
Bill
him.
You mean
Lustig.
that director of Maniac Cop?
The director of Maniac.
That guy?
Yep.
Awesome.
He is awesome.
So any clue when Blue Underground will be, I'm sure you guys don't have dates on this yet, I would think.
Bill initially was talking about Christmas, but it ain't going to happen because as they're doing the 4K scan in England, there was a problem with the scanner, and they're waiting for parts to show up from Italy. So the scan is going to get delayed. And I just came from a meeting with Bill. We were gonna try and do the timing and shoot the extras and stuff in August, and we're not. We're gonna do it in November. So it's like 3 months.
But 2018 for sure.
Yeah, so it's early 2018.
But don't rush them because it's going to be awesome. But you got to
just don't mess with the cover
takes
art.
time.
Yeah, no.
Don't mess with your cover art.
Yeah,
No, we won't.
Go with that original cover art.
Maybe you can have a reverse of something else for fun, but that is perfect. Okay, so back to you, depressed on a couch watching Young and Now, can you talk me through? Like, I'm not kidding. This people who've been listening know I have been talking about Vice Squad since before it became cool again, because this was a movie I happened to see at a video store in Chicago. And I was working at Facets, that you probably know in Chicago. Oh, yeah. So I worked there for a couple years, and I came across this film. I had never heard of it. Yeah, he runs it. And that movie, I'd never seen a performance quite like that. I mean, I guess, Jack Nicholson in The Shining is doing this kind of elevated thing, but with what Wings is doing, it feels like it's coming from this real place. It feels so intense, him playing this white pimp. And, I looked him up, and he hadn't really done anything except Young and the Restless. So my brain can't understand how this movie came to be and how he was in it.
Wings Hauser was married to Nancy Locke at the time. Nancy Locke is the mother of the little boy in Dead and Buried, in the haunted house scene.
Oh, so you already were associated with the family a bit.
So Wings was up in Mendocino with us as the husband of Nancy. And Wings and I got to be friends. And he played guitar, and I play and sing. And so we used to play and sing and little hootenanny. And I got to know Wings pretty well. And I very quickly learned that Wings Hauser was not Greg Foster, the character that he played in The Young and Restless, the world's nicest person. Wings had a lot of darkness in his life. And I felt that darkness needed cultivating because he was going to explode if he didn't have an exit for that darkness. And I started working with him on it. And I just was playing scenes with him even before we talked about Vice Squad, because I knew that Wings had a much greater range than Greg Foster in The Young and Restless was ever able to give. And I found the dark side.
Did you ever?
In Wings that was unbelievable.
Yeah.
So now I go back to the studio and said to the studio, I found who I want to play Ramrod. And they said, who? And I said, Wings Hauser. And they all looked at me and said, Greg Foster? And I said, yeah, but it won't be Greg Foster. And they said, forget about it. Forget about it. It ain't going to happen. Forget about it. So I said to them, can I bring him in to read for you? And they said, yeah, okay. So I go in to the studio with Wings, and Wings and I had really rehearsed this.
Oh, I love it.
And so I'm in there. Bob Ramey's sitting behind the desk, and Frank Capra Jr., who was there, and a few other executives from Avco, and they're just sitting there, and Wings comes in and just looks at everybody. He says, in his voice, they had to lean forward to hear him. He says, I hear you fucking people don't want me in this movie. He says, who? He points at Raimi and he says, who the fuck are you? You're like the big guy here. And he walks up to him across the table, and he reaches over and he grabs him by the tie.
Whoa.
And he pulls him across the table, and he gets right into his face and says, you're the one who's stopping me from being who I want to be, aren't you?
Wow, Ramrod was born in that moment.
And it was unbelievable. And Raimi pulls back a little bit, looks at me and says, okay.
Oh, man, every actor's going to try this now, and it's not going to work out.
It's not going to work
Don't
out.
threaten the Hollywood execs,
It's just going to be assault.
Was that hard to maintain, like, once he's doing this? Because, like, I mean, I always imagine the guys who play villains, that's tough. Like, you know, to keep that up for the whole shoot. Was he a handful? Was he the same guy you knew before? Did he change?
He made me promise. You know, we only shot at night on Vice Squad, and we'd wrap at about 5 o'clock in the morning. And I would take, Wings made me promise that I wouldn't let him go home to Nancy and the kids
as Ramrod.
Yeah. And so I used to have to take Wings out drinking at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, Jesus.
And we'd go to bars and we'd sit there until he was back to being Wings and not Ramrod anymore.
Wow.
And I did that every morning when we finished shooting.
Oh, man.
But I would think drinking would just further enhance.
Yeah.
No, it would mellow him out.
And mellow the Wings.
Yeah.
So with Vice Squad, it's still not available on Blue. We'll hope one day that happens. But even the DVD hasn't been the easiest find. But if you can track it down, people, that is our big recommendation for this week. That is a movie you will not regret. I imagine that's a movie you're super proud of because it's amazing.
It's my favorite. And it is my movie. It was the one movie that didn't get changed. What's in that movie is my movie.
Well, the ugliness of it is, I think, the thing. Like, it feels as ugly as that world probably really is. Like, that's probably a really scary place to be.
That's what I wanted to do. I mean, that film is about violence against women, and and the exploitation of women, and that's why I made that picture, is just to point a finger at that world and this whole sex for money world, which is a pretty awful,
which is still an awful big problem in the world right now.
Yeah.
So we can't let this go. I know we're running out of time. Poltergeist 3 is, listeners of this show, and we told you a second ago, no, we had a previous incarnation of the show where we did how many 140 episodes.
Yeah.
Yep. And we have very different tastes, and yet one of the only sequel that we all, for whatever reason, love is Poltergeist 3. This long before Scream Factory put it out again, and I even revisited it this year, wondering if I was wrong, like, because I hadn't seen it in 15 years, and just still being stunned by some of the optical work, the trick camera effects, the mirrored images. I think as a magician level, I love this movie still.
It's all
Even
live.
The
it's all
production,
There's
production
not-
design.
Yeah.
It's shocking.
Well,
and
Paul Eads is a brilliant production designer, and we had an amazing time making that film. And I wanted it to be the last major movie that was made without any CGI in it. I had done a film very early in CGI, maybe one of the first television movies that ever used CGI, which is The Mysterious Two. And I thought, well, if I did one of the first, I want to do one of the last. And that was my idea. And I know opticals inside and out because I began my career on an optical printer. And I thought I can turn a set into an optical camera, and then the entire negative can be first generation. That was my real goal, is to have the most beautiful film that anybody's ever seen, because there's no interpositive, no internegative. You can print the movie from the original negative. And that's what we set out to do. It was unbelievably complicated. The script, actually, if anybody's interested, they can go to the library at the Academy, the Margaret Herrick Library, and my script, which is about 1.5 feet thick, is there with all my overlays and everything.
Oh, cool.
I had storyboarded every shot. And not only storyboarded the shot, but showed in the script how to shoot it, because nobody understood what I wanted to do. So I put it on paper. I spent a year designing the shots.
It shows. Visually, it just seems like a masterclass in those shots. And there's so many Kanes in it. It's just all the Kanes. I love that. But yeah, so obviously the shoot went fine. The first pass of your film was fine. What was the problem with the ending? Was it you wanting to reshoot the ending, or did
I had an ending that I wanted to shoot on the film, and it was at a time that MGM was having some problems, and they wouldn't let me shoot the ending that I initially wanted to shoot because it was way too expensive.
Yeah.
And so they asked me if I could shoot an ending that would be a lot less expensive. And I said, yeah, we can, but it's not going to be very good. And we shot that ending, and it was awful. It was horrible. It did not work. And you had this film that rode a level, and then boom. And the film was too short because they wouldn't let me shoot, and I had it was like a difference of almost 17 pages.
Oh, whoa.
So I finally talked the studio into shooting the ending the way that it was supposed to be. And we were in pre-production. I had left the movie, and I went and shot a pilot that I had to do for ABC that I had already been contracted to do, and came back to start pre-production on shooting this ending. And during the time that we were doing that is when Heather passed away. And which led to one of the worst days of my life when I was a pallbearer at her funeral.
A child, yes.
It was the worst. That was the worst thing that I have ever had to do in my life, was carry that little girl's body in a box.
Unbelievable.
And it was just awful. It was Henry Winkler and Brian Gibson and myself and Barry Bernardi, I believe, and David Wardlow, who was her agent, and we were the pallbearers, and one person from her family. We were the pallbearers at the funeral, and it was doo-doom.
And then you still have to go and shoot this ending after that. Which
and then we weren't going to. Laddie didn't want to, and Jay didn't want to, and I didn't want to, and the board at MGM, which I said on the commentary when I did the Scream Factory, and they cut it all out because they said that MGM would have been upset.
You can say it here.
Yes.
Well, I'm saying it here. MGM just said, if you don't finish the movie, we'll get somebody else to finish it. And they said that to Jay and Laddie as well as to me. And Jay and Laddie actually were at that point leaving MGM. And they did, and that's when Kerkorian brought in the new crew whose job was to put the studio into bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And doo-doom. And, then the studio comes back to me and says, oh, well, thank you for finishing it, and you can make any movie you want to make. Bring us a script and we'll make it. And the script I brought them was Lisa, which I loved that script.
You know, I saw it only for the first time like 3 weeks ago at a triple feature. It was the last. It played in the New Beverly.
Yeah,
it was the last film.
Sold out.
The whole thing was wild, but there's a moment in it that brought the house down. It was the double headbutt, the mother and the daughter headbutting each other. And it's like I just turned to whoever's watching. I was like, I've never seen that before. It was like truly kind of an astounding moment.
Well, you did see it. Well, you saw it kind of in Vice Squad.
Oh, yeah. But a mother-daughter, I don't know. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah.
It was a fun movie.
And listeners can go back and hear your thoughts on it.
Yes, they can hear that. But you before we were recording, you were kind of walking through what the ending was going to be, what you were planning on. That'd be a fun place to kind of, towards wrapping.
Well, it was a very emotional kind of ending where Tangina was offering to sacrifice herself to Kane and to lead them to the other side so that they didn't have to come back again. And she would do that for them, and she would sacrifice herself if they would give Carol Ann back. And so it was a whole sequence where Carol Ann was on one side, and I didn't want to do it as a fancy special effect. And I talked to Dick Smith about doing it. And it was a matter of, with makeup, changing Tangina into Carol Ann and Carol Ann into Tangina. And it was going to be pretty difficult and pretty impossible. Yeah. But
if anyone could do it, it'd be Dick Smith.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Dick Smith was unbelievable. And then, the guys he had working with him, Caglione and
the other one.
It's okay.
It's okay.
You've done pretty well with names. Your name recollection of producers you've worked with over the years is pretty astounding.
One is fine.
But,
I'm sorry.
It was going to be pretty amazing. I mean, I wish I would have, Dick Smith was the guy that taught Stan Winston everything he knew. And both of them are gone.
Yeah.
I mean, I've just, that's the thing. I worked with Stan Winston. I worked with Dick Smith. I worked with Harry Frampton, who did Deathline. Mm-hmm. Harry Frampton did Alec Guinness's Fagin in David Lean's Oliver Twist. He was one of the greats. And I mean, all three of those guys were just amazing. Amazing.
Well, I think Scream Factory did an excellent job on Poltergeist 3 with all the features and stuff.
It looks gorgeous.
Definitely check that one out.
Yeah, it looks really pretty.
We don't want to wrap up. But literally the night that we are recording this is the night that Deathline is playing at the Cine Family in Los Angeles.
And I guess we should get you to the screening on time.
I'm driving Gary to the screening, so I have to get him to the screening.
Yes.
But Gary, thank you so much for coming on the show and making it happen while you were in town. And I hope that you'll come back and we'll try to do a part 2 where we're not rushing you to a screening.
Good. I'd love to do a part 2.
Because we want to know what happens in your next act.
And I want to, we've got much more to discuss. So, we'll hopefully see you again really soon.
We never talked about what's coming.
I know, but we'll get to it, I promise. And thank you, and we will continue this.
Ramrod 2 Electric Boogaloo.